The Billionaire CEO said, "I don't marry fat black women." But the moment she walked in, his entire world shattered. He thought he was untouchable, rich, powerful, and in control. But when a stunning, confident woman steps into the room, every cruel word he spoke turns back on him. She's not just another guest, she's the voice that could expose his heartless truth to everyone watching. What starts as arrogance becomes obsession. And what begins with prejudice could end in the fight of his life to prove he can change. But when the world turns their cameras on them, twisting their story into a scandal, can a man who built his empire on pride ever win the trust of the one woman who can see straight through him? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The warm glow of crystal chandeliers cast elegant shadows across the white tablecloths of Le Bernardin, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. Richard Harrington sat back in his leather chair, the rich burgundy wine swirling in his glass as he held court with 3 business associates. His tailored charcoal suit and commanding presence drew occasional glances from other diners, though he barely noticed them anymore. Marriage? He scoffed, responding to a colleague's gentle probe about his personal life. "Please, I have standards." His voice carried that familiar edge of superiority that had become his trademark. "I don't marry fat black women, they're not my type." The words fell from his lips with casual cruelty, followed by a dismissive chuckle. His dinner companions shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Thomas, a senior VP, forced a weak laugh while adjusting his tie. Sarah, the chief financial officer, pressed her lips together and studied her plate. Even James, usually quick with a joke, could only manage a grimace disguised as a smile. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by the soft chime of the restaurant's entrance door. Like a ripple in still water, a change moved through the room. Heads turned, conversations paused, and even the usually unflappable waitstaff slowed their practice dance between tables. Naomi Brooks stood in the doorway, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Her emerald dress caught the light like precious stone, hugging curves that she wore with unapologetic confidence. Her skin glowed with vitality, and her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo that crowned her like royalty. At 30 years old, she carried herself with the kind of grace that couldn't be bought or taught. Richard's fork slipped from his fingers, clattering against fine china with a sharp ping that cut through the momentary hush. His mouth fell slightly open as he stared, transfixed by the woman who had just unwittingly proved him wrong about everything he thought he knew about beauty. Naomi moved through the restaurant like she owned it, each step purposeful and assured. She wasn't trying to command attention, she simply did. Her presence had weight, substance, the kind of authentic confidence that made Richard's practiced arrogance seem hollow in comparison. The maître greeted her with genuine warmth, taking her coat and leading her toward a table near the window. As she passed Richard's table, the scent of her perfume's subtle notes of jasmine and vanilla drifted by, adding another layer to his sensory overload. Sarah, noting Richard's unprecedented silence, cleared her throat. "Richard, you were saying something about standards?" Her voice carried a hint of challenge that she'd never dared before. Richard couldn't form words. For the first time in recent memory, his quick wit failed him. He watched as Naomi settled into her seat, the emerald fabric of her dress catching the light. She smiled at her waiter, and the genuine warmth of it transformed her already beautiful face into something extraordinary. Richard started, then stopped. His wineglass sat forgotten, his earlier proclamation hanging in the air like an accusation. The same man who confidently closed billion-dollar deals and commanded boardrooms found himself struggling to string together a coherent thought. Thomas leaned forward, a knowing smirk playing at his lips. "Cat got your tongue, Richard? That's not like you at all." James, sensing an opportunity to break the tension, added, "Maybe we should revise our earlier conversation about types, Richard shot them both warning glances, but the effect was diminished by the slight flush creeping up his neck. He couldn't stop his eyes from drifting back to Naomi's table, where she was now engaged in conversation with what appeared to be a business associate of her own. The confidence with which she carried herself, the intelligence evident in her animated discussion, the way other diners seemed drawn to her natural charisma, it all contradicted every dismissive assumption he'd voiced minutes earlier. The shame of his words began to sink in, made worse by the living proof of his ignorance sitting mere tables away. Sarah, who had worked with Richard long enough to read him well, watched this internal struggle play out across his features. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "life has a way of making us face our prejudices head-on." Richard picked up his fork again, straightening it with precise movements. "Let's discuss the Miller account," he said stiffly, attempting to steer the conversation back to familiar territory. But his usual authoritative tone was lacking, replaced by something that sounded almost uncertain. Throughout the remainder of the meal, Richard's attention remained divided. He made an admirable attempt to focus on business matters, but his eyes betrayed him, repeatedly drawn to Naomi's table like a compass finding true north. Each time he looked, he discovered something new: the musical quality of her laugh, the graceful movement of her hands as she spoke, the way she treated the waitstaff with genuine respect. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on his dinner companions, who exchanged knowing glances as their usually focused CEO struggled to maintain his composure. The man who had so confidently proclaimed his standards just minutes before was now visibly shaken by the very type of woman he'd dismissed. As the evening wore on, Richard's discomfort grew. Each burst of Naomi's laughter felt like a personal rebuke. Every glimpse of her confident smile chipped away at his carefully constructed worldview. The wine in his glass remained untouched, his perfectly prepared steak grew cold, and his contributions to the business discussion became increasingly distracted and monosyllabic. At one point, Naomi rose from her table to visit the restroom, her movement drawing every eye in the vicinity. Richard's hand tightened around his water glass as she passed, close enough for him to see the delicate gold earrings that caught the light with each step. The subtle sway of her hips, the straight line of her spine, the quiet dignity in her bearing, everything about her radiated a beauty that transcended his narrow definitions. "You know," Thomas said thoughtfully, watching Richard's reaction, "sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. And sometimes it has a way of teaching us lessons we didn't know we needed to learn." Richard didn't respond. He couldn't. The weight of his earlier words pressed down on him like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe in his perfectly tailored suit. The restaurant suddenly felt too warm, too crowded, too full of witnesses, to his humiliation. When the check came, Richard signed it without his usual scrutiny of the bill. His hand, usually so steady when signing million-dollar contracts, trembled slightly as he scrawled his name. He couldn't get out of the restaurant fast enough, but even as he stood to leave, his eyes were drawn one final time to Naomi's table. She was laughing again, head thrown back, joy radiating from her in waves. The sight struck him like a physical blow, forcing him to confront not just the beauty before him, but the ugliness of his own prejudices. In that moment, Richard Harrington, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, felt small. As they filed out of the restaurant, Sarah hung back slightly, falling into step beside Richard. "You know," she said softly, so only he could hear, "it's never too late to learn how to see people really see them." She patted his arm gently and moved ahead to join the others, leaving Richard standing alone in the cool evening air, staring back through the restaurant's windows at the woman who had, without saying a word, shaken his world to its foundations. Naomi moved through the restaurant with effortless grace, her emerald dress catching the warm light of the crystal chandeliers. Several well-dressed attendees rose from their tables to greet her, their faces lighting up with genuine warmth. "Miss Brooks, so wonderful to see you," called out Margaret Chen, one of the gala organizers, reaching out to clasp Naomi's hand. "We're absolutely thrilled to have you as our keynote speaker tonight." Naomi's smile brightened the space around her. "The honor is mine, Margaret. The work your foundation does for our community means everything." At his table, Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair, acutely aware of his colleagues' pointed looks. Thomas, his chief financial officer, cleared his throat meaningfully. "Not your type, eh?" Sarah whispered, raising an eyebrow. "Funny how life works sometimes." Richard straightened his tie, a nervous gesture he hadn't displayed since his early days as CEO. "Can we focus on dinner?" he said tersely, but his attempt at authority fell flat. Throughout the meal, Richard found his attention repeatedly drawn to Naomi's table. She sat with a diverse group of community leaders, her animated conversations punctuated by genuine laughter that carried across the room. The way she leaned in when others spoke, her attentive nods, the gentle touch of her hand on someone's shoulder, everything about her radiated authentic connection. The quarterly projections, Richard started, trying to direct attention back to business. "Look who's distracted." James, his marketing director, interrupted with a smirk. "I thought you weren't interested in..." "Enough," Richard snapped, but his usual commanding tone lacked conviction. His fingers drummed against the pristine tablecloth, betraying his unease. The evening progressed, and Richard watched as Naomi navigated the room with natural diplomacy. She stopped at various tables, greeting people from all walks of life with the same sincere interest. Children ran up to hug her, elderly patrons beamed at her approach, and even the waitstaff seemed to stand taller in her presence. When the time came for her speech, the room hushed in anticipation. Naomi approached the podium with measured steps, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. The spotlight caught the subtle highlights in her dark hair, creating a soft halo effect that made Richard's breath catch. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice rich and clear. "Tonight, we're here to talk about something bigger than ourselves. We're here to talk about dignity." Richard's fork clattered against his plate. The word dignity echoed in his ears, a sharp contrast to his earlier crude remarks. "In my work at the community center," Naomi continued, "I see young girls struggling with their worth every single day. Society tells them they're too much of this, not enough of that. Too loud, too quiet, too big, too small." Her eyes swept the room, passionate but composed. "But I tell them something different. I tell them they are exactly who they're meant to be." Each word felt like a personal rebuke to Richard, though Naomi never glanced in his direction. His colleagues shifted in their seats, the tension palpable. "These girls come from broken homes, from neighborhoods where hope seems like a luxury they can't afford. But let me tell you about faith." Naomi's voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. "Faith isn't just about believing in God. It's about believing in yourself, in your community, in the power of lifting each other up instead of tearing each other down." The room hung on her every word. Richard noticed tears in the eyes of several guests, saw heads nodding in agreement. His own throat felt tight, constricted by emotions he couldn't name. When we judge others based on appearance, when we dismiss them without knowing their hearts, we don't just hurt them, we hurt ourselves. We close doors to blessings we never knew existed. Naomi's words resonated through the space, striking chords of truth that made Richard's earlier statement feel even more shallow and cruel. She shared stories of girls finding their voice, of communities coming together, of barriers broken through love and persistence. Each anecdote was a masterclass in human dignity, each lesson a subtle indictment of prejudice and arrogance. "Tonight, I challenge each of you to look beyond your comfortable assumptions," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "See the beauty in differences, find strength in diversity, and recognize that every person carries a story worthy of respect." The applause that followed was thunderous. People rose to their feet, their appreciation echoing off the restaurant's elegant walls. Richard found himself standing too, though he couldn't remember making the conscious decision to do so. As Naomi stepped down from the podium, she passed near Richard's table. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Her expression revealed nothing, no judgment, no anger, no recognition of his earlier words, just a quiet confidence that seemed to say she needed neither his approval nor his disdain. That neutral glance somehow hurt more than outright contempt would have. Richard watched her return to her table, surrounded by well-wishers and admirers, each of them eager to express their appreciation for her words. The weight of his earlier statement pressed down on him like a physical burden, making his expensive suit feel too tight, too restrictive. His colleagues remained unusually quiet, letting the impact of the moment settle. Sarah finally broke the silence, her voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes, Richard, the most valuable business lessons aren't about profit margins at all." Richard couldn't respond. He watched as Naomi continued to receive congratulations, her genuine smile never wavering, her presence a living testament to everything his thoughtless words had dismissed. The evening continued around him, but he remained lost in thought, haunted by the stark contrast between his prejudiced statement and the remarkable reality before him. The elegant dining room buzzed with post-speech energy as waiters cleared dinner plates and began serving an array of delicate desserts. Richard sat at his table, absently stirring his coffee, the silver spoon clinking against fine china in an unsteady rhythm. His colleagues had dispersed to network, leaving him alone with his thoughts, and the growing whispers that seemed to follow him around the room. "Did you hear what he said earlier?" A woman in a blue cocktail dress whispered to her companion as they passed his table. "About not dating." "Shh!" Her friend cut her off, but their meaningful glances in his direction spoke volumes. Richard loosened his tie slightly, feeling uncomfortably warm despite the room's perfect temperature. He'd built his empire on being unshakable, but tonight his foundation felt cracked. Every time he looked up, he found himself searching for Naomi in the crowd, drawn to her magnetic presence even as shame churned in his stomach. She moved through the gathering with easy grace, stopping to chat with various guests, her laugh carrying across the room like music. The emerald dress caught the light as she turned, making her skin glow. Richard couldn't reconcile the powerful, elegant woman before him with the crude dismissal he'd voiced earlier. Needing to escape the whispers, he made his way to the dessert table. An elaborate chocolate fountain burbled at the center, surrounded by fresh fruit and petite fours. He reached for a strawberry, only to find another hand reaching for the same one. Naomi. Up close, she was even more striking. Her eyes held a quiet strength that made him want to look away, but he couldn't. "Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice carrying the same measured confidence it had during her speech. "I believe this is our first proper introduction." Richard fumbled with the strawberry, nearly dropping it. "Miss Brooks, your money can build towers," she cut in, her tone calm but sharp as a surgeon's blade, "but your heart lives in ruins." The words hit him like a physical blow. He'd faced down hostile takeovers and boardroom coups, but this woman's quiet assessment left him stammering. That is, what I said earlier, was honest, at least." Naomi finished for him, though not particularly kind or wise. She selected a different strawberry, dipped it delicately in the chocolate fountain. "But I'm not here to shame you, Mr. Harrington. That's not my style." Richard found himself struggling to maintain his usual commanding presence. "Then why?" "Because I believe in second chances," she said simply. "And because the girls at my community center could use someone with your resources in their corner." The sudden shift in conversation threw him off balance. "Your community center?" "The Hope and Grace Center for Young Women," Naomi explained, her passion evident in every word. "We provide after-school programs, mentoring, college prep assistance, and safe spaces for girls from challenging backgrounds. Girls who hear plenty of people tell them what they can't do or can't be." Her gaze held his steadily. "Sound familiar?" Richard felt the heat rise in his face, but Naomi continued before he could respond. "We're always looking for corporate sponsors who want to make a real difference. Someone who could fund a computer lab or a scholarship program." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Unless, of course, we're not your type of charity either." The elegant barb found its mark. Richard cleared his throat. "I would be interested in learning more about your programs." A server passed with champagne, and Richard gratefully took a glass, needing something to do with his hands. The familiar crystal felt like an anchor in the strange waters of this conversation. "Would you?" Naomi asked, raising an eyebrow. "Or are you just trying to save face after your earlier commentary?" Her directness was both refreshing and unsettling. Most people tiptoed around him, careful not to offend the billionaire CEO, but Naomi Brooks spoke her truth without fear or favor. "I deserve that," he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "What I said was inappropriate. I apologize." "Interesting choice of word, inappropriate," Naomi observed. "Not wrong or prejudiced or harmful. Just inappropriate, like wearing white after Labor Day." Richard gripped his champagne glass tighter. "You're not making this easy." "Why should I?" she asked, but her tone held more curiosity than anger. "Tell me, Mr. Harrington, when was the last time someone challenged you? Really challenged you, not just nodded along to keep their job or get your money?" The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Richard couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him this directly about his behavior. Around them, the gala continued in full swing. The chocolate fountain burbled, glasses clinked, laughter and conversation filled the air. But in their small bubble by the dessert table, time seemed to slow down. The center hosts an open house every first Thursday of the month, Naomi said finally. 7 o'clock. Come see what we do, meet some of the girls whose lives we're trying to change. Then decide if we're worth your time and resources. She handed him a simple business card, cream-colored, elegant in its simplicity. The contact information was printed in clear, professional font. No frills, no desperate pitch for attention or help, just like the woman herself. Richard began, but Naomi was already turning away. "Good evening, Mr. Harrington," she said over her shoulder. "Thank you for listening. That's more than I expected, honestly." He watched her rejoin her team, a diverse group of women who clearly adored her, judging by their warm smiles and familiar touches. They gathered their things, preparing to leave while the party was still in full swing. Richard stood rooted to his spot by the dessert table, the business card feeling both light as air and heavy as lead in his hand. The champagne in his glass had gone flat, the chocolate-covered strawberry forgotten. As Naomi and her team made their way to the exit, the room seemed to dim slightly, as if her presence had been providing extra illumination. The continuing clink of glasses and murmur of conversations felt hollow now, stripped of meaning. He looked down at the card again, running his thumb over the embossed letters. The Hope and Grace Center for Young Women. Such a simple name for what was clearly a powerful mission. Just as Naomi Brooks was so much more than the dismissive category he'd placed her in earlier. The evening continued around him, but Richard barely noticed. His mind kept returning to Naomi's words, her challenge, and the quiet dignity with which she'd offered him a chance at redemption he wasn't sure he deserved. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Richard's Central Park penthouse, but he barely noticed the spectacular view. He sat in his king-sized bed, laptop balanced on his knees, coffee growing cold on the nightstand beside him. His fingers moved across the keyboard, typing Naomi Brooks Hope and Grace Center into the search bar. Article after article filled his screen. Local news coverage praised her work transforming young lives. Community papers highlighted fundraising events and success stories. One piece particularly caught his eye, a profile from 3 years ago, showing Naomi surrounded by beaming teenage girls in graduation caps and gowns. 98% of our girls graduate high school, she was quoted saying. 100% of those who graduate go on to college or vocational training. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. Each girl represents a family changed, a cycle broken, a future brightened. Richard scrolled through more photos. Naomi teaching a class. Naomi at a community rally. Naomi accepting a local humanitarian award. In every image, her smile radiated genuine joy and purpose. He reached for his phone, pressing the intercom button. "Janet, come in here please." His assistant appeared moments later, tablet in hand. "Yes, Mr. Harrington?" "Clear my morning meetings," he said, still scrolling through articles. "I need to make an unscheduled stop somewhere." Janet's perfectly manicured fingers flew across her tablet. "The board meeting at 10. Reschedule it." "But sir, the quarterly projections." Richard looked up, his expression brooking no argument. "I said reschedule it." "Yes, sir." Janet made a few more taps. "Where should I tell your driver to take you?" Richard grabbed Naomi's business card from his nightstand. The Hope and Grace Center for Young Women. He read off the address in East Harlem. Janet's eyebrows rose slightly, but she kept her professional composure. "Will you be requiring any additional security for that neighborhood, sir?" "No," Richard said sharply, then softened his tone. "Just the usual detail." After Janet left, Richard showered and dressed with particular care. He chose a charcoal Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, but somehow it felt like armor today. Protection against what? He wasn't sure. The ride from his Upper East Side penthouse to East Harlem took 20 minutes, but it might as well have been 20 years. The streets transformed from manicured perfection to urban reality. His Mercedes glided past discount stores, check-cashing outlets, and busy bodegas. The Hope and Grace Center occupied an old 3-story brownstone. Paint peeled from the window frames, but cheerful posters and children's artwork decorated the windows. A small sign above the door displayed the center's name in simple lettering. Richard's driver opened his door, and he stepped onto the cracked sidewalk. A group of young girls in school uniforms rushed past him, giggling and chattering as they entered the building. They barely gave him a second glance. Inside, the narrow hallway hummed with activity. More girls moved between rooms, carrying books and laptops. The walls were covered with motivational posters and college pennants. Despite the worn carpet and scuffed walls, the space felt alive with purpose. "Mr. Harrington." Naomi's voice cut through the bustle. She stood in a doorway, wearing a simple navy dress that somehow looked more elegant than all the designer outfits at last night's gala. "I wasn't expecting you quite so soon." "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, suddenly feeling overdressed and out of place. "You are, actually," she replied matter-of-factly. "But since you're here," she gestured for him to follow. They moved through the building, Naomi pointing out different spaces. A computer lab with outdated machines. A library where girls sat two to a chair because there wasn't enough seating. A small kitchen where volunteers prepared after-school snacks. "This is our main classroom," Naomi said, opening a door. Inside, at least 30 girls sat at desks, clearly meant for 20. A young teacher wrote algebra equations on a Delzensping whiteboard that had seen better days. "Hello, Miss Brooks," the girls chorused. Several curious eyes studied Richard, but their attention quickly returned to their lesson. "We're over capacity in every room," Naomi explained as they continued walking. "We have a waiting list of more than 200 girls." but we can't expand without more resources. Richard's throat felt tight. He'd spent more on his watch than it would cost to properly furnish these rooms. The shame sat heavy in his stomach. I want to help, he said, reaching for his checkbook. Whatever you need. Naomi held up her hand, stopping him. Put that away. But, Mr. Harrington, she said, her voice firm but not unkind. These girls don't need your guilt money. They need commitment. They need people who show up, who stick around, who prove that they matter beyond a tax-deductible donation. A girl rushed past them, arms full of textbooks. Naomi steadied her with a gentle hand, helping her gather a fallen paper. Thank you, Miss Brooks, the girl called over her shoulder as she hurried on. That's Maya, Naomi said softly. Her mother works 3 jobs. Maya comes here every day after school, helps younger girls with their homework, then does her own. She's determined to be the first in her family to go to college. She turned to face Richard directly. So before you pull out that checkbook, ask yourself, are you really here to help these girls, or just to make yourself feel better about last night? Richard stood silent, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a costume. Around him, life at the center continued, girls laughing, studying, supporting each other. He realized he had no easy answer to Naomi's question. The peeling paint, the crowded rooms, the outdated equipment, it all spoke to urgent needs that his wealth could easily address. But Naomi's words rang true. These girls deserved more than a guilty conscience and a quick fix. How do I prove I'm serious? He asked finally. Show up, Naomi replied simply. Not just today, not just when it's convenient. Show up when it's hard, when it's inconvenient, when there are no cameras or recognition. Show these girls that they matter enough for someone like you to give them your time, not just your money. Before Richard could respond, a bell rang, and the hallway filled with movement as girls changed classes. He watched as Naomi greeted several by name, asking about tests and family members, offering encouragement and gentle corrections. This was what real impact looked like, he realized. Not grand gestures or massive donations, but consistent presence and genuine care. His billions suddenly felt meaningless compared to the wealth of connection he witnessed in this worn-down building. I should go, he said, feeling more uncertain than he had in years. Thank you for showing me around. Naomi nodded, already turning to help a student with a question. Remember what I said, Mr. Harrington. These girls don't need another disappointed adult in their lives. If you come back, make sure you mean it. The next morning, Richard stood before his walk-in closet, pushing aside rows of tailored suits. In the far corner, he found what he was looking for, a pair of rarely worn jeans and some Nike sneakers his personal shopper had bought months ago. He pulled on a simple gray t-shirt, studying his reflection. The casual clothes felt foreign, like a costume for a role he'd forgotten how to play. The community center's parking lot was filling up with yellow school buses when he arrived. Children poured out, their backpacks bouncing as they raced toward the entrance. Richard took a deep breath and stepped out of his Mercedes, feeling oddly vulnerable without his usual armor of designer suits. Inside, the halls echoed with afternoon energy. He found the gymnasium where dozens of kids were gathering for after-school activities. Some played basketball while others sat in small groups doing homework on the Bayesian bleachers. Naomi stood near the basketball court, clipboard in hand, directing traffic like a seasoned conductor. She did a double take when she spotted him, her eyebrows rising at his casual attire. Mr. Harrington, she said, surprise evident in her voice. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. I thought about what you said, he replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. About showing up. A group of kids ran past, one of them dribbling a worn basketball. Want to play? A young boy called out to Richard, his smile missing 2 front teeth. Richard hesitated, but Naomi's challenging look spurred him forward. Sure, he said, joining the kids on the court. It had been decades since he'd played basketball. His first attempt at dribbling was embarrassingly clumsy, and his shot barely grazed the bottom of the net. The kids giggled, but not unkindly. Here, mister, said the gap-toothed boy, demonstrating proper form. Like this. Richard followed the child's instructions, making his next shot. The ball bounced off the backboard and through the hoop. The kids cheered, and Richard found himself grinning. From the sidelines, Naomi watched with poorly concealed amusement as the polished CEO stumbled through a game of pickup basketball with elementary school students. His hair was falling out of its careful styling, and sweat darkened his t-shirt, but his smile was genuine. After basketball, Richard noticed a group struggling with math homework. He pulled up a folding chair and joined their circle. 7 times 8 giving you trouble? He asked a girl who was frowning at her worksheet. She nodded, twirling her pencil nervously. Let's break it down, Richard said, drawing a simple diagram on scratch paper. He remembered his own struggles with multiplication tables, back when his family couldn't afford a tutor. Think of it as 7 groups of 8. For the next hour, Richard helped the students work through their math problems, discovering reserves of patience he'd forgotten he possessed. Each small victory, a correct answer, a concept finally understood, brought satisfaction different from any business deal. The afternoon light was fading when parents began arriving to pick up their children. Richard helped stack chairs and collect stray pencils, his designer jeans now dusty from the gym floor. Naomi approached as the last children left, their voices fading into the evening. You surprised me today, she admitted, organizing papers at a worn desk. I surprised myself, Richard replied honestly. She settled into a chair, studying him with those penetrating eyes. Why are you really here, Mr. Harrington? Richard, he corrected gently. And I'm here because I need to be better than who I was at that restaurant. Naomi's expression flickered. You know, those words you said, they weren't just offensive. They were personal for me. Richard sat quietly, sensing the weight of what she was about to share. 3 years ago, I was engaged, she continued, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the desk. Marcus was successful, charming, everything I thought I wanted. But as the wedding got closer, he started making comments about my weight, suggesting I try different diets. She took a breath. 2 months before the wedding, he told me I wasn't his type anymore, and left. The pain in her voice made Richard's chest tight. He thought of his careless words at the restaurant, how they must have echoed that old wound. I spent months believing something was wrong with me, Naomi said, until I realized the problem was never my body, it was his heart. She gestured around the center. That's why I do this work. These girls need to know their worth isn't determined by anyone else's preferences. Richard absorbed her words, seeing the strength behind her guarded smile. He understood now why his presence made her wary. He represented everything about the world that had tried to diminish her. As the janitor's vacuum hummed in the distance, Naomi gathered her things. Time to lock up, she said, her professional mask sliding back into place. Richard walked her to the door, watching as she checked each lock with practiced efficiency. The evening air was cool, carrying the first hints of autumn. From his car, Richard watched Naomi walk to her own vehicle, her silhouette strong and dignified in the gathering dusk. She didn't look back as she drove away, leaving him alone with thoughts of redemption and the unexpected warmth of children's laughter. The Mercedes felt different as he pulled out of the parking lot, less like a status symbol and more like just a car. The evening traffic moved around him, but his mind stayed in that gymnasium, with worn basketballs and math worksheets and the possibility of becoming someone better than he'd been before. Monday morning brought Richard back to the community center, this time with paintbrushes and drop cloths tucked under his arm. The old classroom walls, dingy from years of use, begged for fresh color. Sky blue, Naomi had suggested, showing him the paint cans she'd picked up. It helps the kids feel less confined. Richard rolled up the sleeves of his casual button-down shirt, revealing forearms unused to manual labor. The children who arrived after school pitched in eagerly, their small hands creating more mess than progress, but their enthusiasm was infectious. Mr. Richard, look, a little girl named Tanya proudly displayed her paint-splattered hands. I'm turning into a Smurf, he chuckled, helping her wash up at the sink while Naomi supervised the more focused painters. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, catching dust motes and the fresh scent of paint. Tuesday found him hauling boxes of books into the center's small library. He'd remembered Naomi mentioning their outdated collection and had ordered hundreds of new titles, everything from picture books to young adult novels, with special attention to diverse authors and stories. The Adventures of Ada Twist, Scientist? Naomi picked up one of the books, her eyebrows raised. You did your research. Richard shrugged, trying to hide his pleasure at her approval. My assistant helped. She has kids. The children's excitement when they saw the new books made every penny worth it. They sprawled on the worn carpet, eagerly flipping pages, while Richard helped organize the shelves. Wednesday and Thursday blurred together in a flurry of activity. Richard learned the rhythm of the center, homework time, snacks, activities, dinner. He found himself looking forward to the controlled chaos, so different from his sterile corporate world. By Friday evening, he was ladling out soup in the center's modest kitchen, wearing an apron that barely contained his broad shoulders. The dinner program served not just the regular students but any family in need. "More carrots, please," a shy 7-year-old asked, holding up his bowl. Richard obliged, adding an extra serving of bread. "You're getting good at this," Naomi commented, passing behind him with a stack of clean plates. Her shoulder brushed his back, a fleeting touch that sent warmth through his chest. As the last family left, expressing heartfelt thanks, Richard and Naomi fell into an easy cleanup routine. The kitchen's fluorescent lights hummed softly while they worked. "When I was little," Naomi said, breaking their comfortable silence, "my mama worked 2 jobs. Sometimes dinner was whatever we could find in the pantry." She smiled, wiping down a counter. "One night, I tried to make soup from ketchup packets and hot water." Richard paused in his dish, drying. "How'd that turn out?" "Horrible," she laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. "But my little sister ate it anyway, said it was the best soup ever." Her eyes softened with the memory. "That's why this matters so much to me. Every child deserves real food, real care." Richard set down his towel, leaning against the industrial sink. "I understand more than you might think." He took a deep breath, surprised by his own willingness to share. "Growing up, I was the skinny kid with holes in his shoes. The other boys." He swallowed hard. "They made sure I never forgot it." Naomi stilled, watching him with gentle attention. "When I started making money," he continued, "it felt like armor. Like finally, no one could hurt me anymore." His fingers traced patterns in the condensation on a clean pot. "But I guess I built the walls so high, I forgot how to let anyone in." "Walls can protect us," Naomi said softly, "but they can trap us too." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and Richard felt seen, not as the billionaire CEO, but as the vulnerable boy he'd once been. Naomi's gaze held no judgment, only understanding. Rain began to fall outside, its gentle rhythm on the metal roof creating a cocoon around their moment. Neither spoke, letting the quiet understanding stretch between them. The harsh fluorescent lights softened somehow, and Richard noticed how Naomi's eyes caught the light, warm and deep. She was the first to look away, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. But something had shifted, as subtle and significant as the changing weather outside. They finished cleaning in companionable silence, the rain providing a soothing backdrop. Every now and then, their hands would brush as they passed dishes or moved around each other in the small space. Each touch felt charged with unspoken possibility. The kitchen gradually transformed back to its pristine state, ready for another day of serving the community. Richard helped Naomi put away the last of the pots, hyper-aware of her presence beside him. The rain continued its gentle percussion on the roof, creating a private world where past hurts and present hopes mingled like watercolors. In the quiet kitchen, with soap bubbles still clinging to his rolled-up sleeves, Richard realized he felt more himself than he had in years. Naomi reached up to adjust a pan on a high shelf, and Richard automatically stepped forward to help. They found themselves standing close, the pan forgotten as their gazes locked once again. The moment stretched like honey, sweet and suspended in time, broken only by the steady rhythm of rain above them. Neither moved to step away immediately, allowing the quiet understanding between them to deepen. The vulnerability they'd shared hung in the air like the steam from the industrial dishwasher, softening their usual barriers. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking time in this pocket of peace they'd found together. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, but here, in this humble kitchen, something profound and delicate was taking root. The Saturday morning sun painted Brooklyn's streets in warm golden light. Naomi stood amid a growing crowd of volunteers, directing the setup of folding tables and colorful banners that stretched between lampposts. The block party fundraiser for the community center was her vision coming to life, a celebration of neighborhood spirit and shared purpose. When Richard's sleek black car pulled up, she couldn't help but smile at how out of place it looked among the modest family sedans and delivery vans. He stepped out wearing khakis and a light blue button-down shirt, dressed down by his standards, but still carrying himself with that corporate polish. "I brought supplies," he called out, opening his trunk to reveal boxes of paper goods and decorations. "Though I wasn't quite sure what a block party needed." Naomi walked over, shaking her head with amusement. "You didn't have to bring anything, just yourself was enough." "I never show up empty-handed," he said, lifting a box. "Where should these go?" She pointed him toward a cluster of tables where volunteers were setting up food stations. Richard moved through the growing crowd with careful steps, clearly uncertain of his place in this informal gathering. His usual commanding presence seemed muted here, away from corporate boardrooms and five-star restaurants. As the morning progressed, the street transformed into a festival of community spirit. The scent of barbecue filled the air as several neighbors fired up their grills. Children darted between tables decorated with bright tablecloths, their laughter mixing with the upbeat music playing from portable speakers. Richard stood near the drinks table, his hands in his pockets, watching the scene unfold. Naomi approached with a paper plate loaded with food. "You need to try Miss Regina's famous mac and cheese," she said, offering him the plate. "It's legendary around here." He accepted it with a grateful smile. "I feel a bit out of place?" she finished for him. "Everyone's welcome here. That's the whole point." As if to prove her words, a group of teenage boys called out to Richard. "Hey, Mr. H, come play basketball with us." Richard glanced at Naomi, who gave him an encouraging nod. He rolled up his sleeves and joined the pickup game. His corporate grace didn't translate well to the court. He missed more shots than he made, but his genuine effort and good-natured laughs at his own mistakes won over the teens. The afternoon stretched on, filled with moments that slowly chipped away at Richard's carefully maintained facade. He sampled dishes from every table, complimenting the cooks with genuine enthusiasm. He learned the names of regular center attendees and their families, listening intently to their stories. A small girl in a yellow sundress approached him as he was helping to refill the ice chest. She tugged at his sleeve, her eyes wide with wonder. "You look like a prince from TV," she said solemnly. "The ones in the fairy tales." Richard knelt down to her level, his expression softening. "That's very kind, but I'm just Richard. What's your name?" "Lily," she replied. "Want to see my drawing?" Without hesitation, Richard followed Lily to a Purtis's in Dottie children's art table, where she proudly showed him her crayon masterpiece. Naomi watched from across the street, struck by how naturally he engaged with the child, asking questions and praising her artistic choices. As the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the street, Richard volunteered to help serve refreshments. He balanced a tray of lemonade cups with careful concentration, distributing them to thirsty children who crowded around him. "Slow down, one at a time," he said with patience, making sure every child got their drink safely. His designer watch caught the sunlight as he bent down to hand a cup to a tiny boy who could barely reach the tray. The evening settled into a gentle rhythm of music, conversation, and shared joy. String lights twinkled overhead, creating a magical atmosphere as families gathered for the final moments of the celebration. Richard approached the small stage area where announcements had been made throughout the day. He picked up the microphone, drawing everyone's attention. Naomi felt her heart skip. They hadn't planned for any speeches. "I'd like to say something, if I may," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "When I first visited this community center, I thought I understood what it was about. But being here today, sharing food and laughter with all of you, I realize I had no idea." He paused, his eyes finding Naomi in the crowd. "This center, this community, exists because of one extraordinary woman." Naomi Brooks saw a need, and filled it with more than just programs and services. She filled it with heart. Naomi felt warmth spread across her cheeks as all eyes turned to her. Richard continued, his voice growing softer but more intense. "She is, without doubt, the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. Her strength isn't just in what she does, but in how she does it, with grace, wisdom, and an unshakable belief in the good in people." His gaze held hers, even when they don't deserve it. The crowd burst into applause, many calling out their agreement. Naomi stood rooted to the spot, feeling tears prick at her eyes. Richard's words had stripped away all pretense, leaving only truth that resonated deep in her chest. Community members surrounded her with hugs and words of agreement. Miss Regina squeezed her hand and whispered, "He sees you, baby. Really sees you." And he did. In that moment, under the twinkling lights with her community around her, Naomi felt truly seen, not just her work or her role, but all of her. The strength and the vulnerability, the dreams and the fears, the whole complex truth of who she was. The applause gradually died down, replaced by the gentle murmur of conversations and the soft playing of music. But something had shifted, as tangible as the evening breeze that carried the last traces of barbecue smoke away into the darkening sky. Children chased each other through the crowd, their energy undimmed by the long day. Parents began gathering supplies and leftover food, sharing containers and compliments. The block party was winding down, but its spirit lingered in the warm summer air. Richard had stepped down from the stage and was helping to stack chairs, his earlier uncertainty replaced by comfortable belonging. He worked alongside longtime community members, exchanging jokes and stories as if he'd always been part of their circle. Naomi watched him, still processing his words, still feeling the weight of being truly seen. The string lights overhead cast a gentle glow, turning the ordinary street into something magical, a place where barriers fell away and hearts opened to new possibilities. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as Naomi approached the daily grind, a cozy cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. Her heart fluttered when she spotted Richard already waiting outside, dressed casually in a light blue button-down shirt and dark jeans. He looked different away from the community center, more vulnerable somehow. "I got here early," he admitted with a sheepish smile, opening the door for her. "I didn't want to risk being late." The cafe buzzed with quiet morning energy, the gentle hiss of espresso machines, soft jazz playing overhead, and the murmur of conversations. They found a quiet corner table by a window, sunlight streaming through potted plants on the windowsill. "I ordered us both coffee," Richard said, then quickly added, "but if you'd prefer something else." "Coffee's perfect," Naomi assured him, settling into the comfortable chair. She wore a flowing yellow sundress that made her skin glow, her hair swept up in a neat bun. Their drinks arrived, Richard's black, Naomi's with a splash of cream. For a moment, they both held their mugs, the warmth seeping into their hands, creating a bridge across the table between them. "I've been thinking about what you said at the block party," Naomi began, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "About seeing the good in people." Richard's expression softened. "I meant every word. I know you did. That's what scares me." She took a sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. "Faith isn't easy for me anymore, Richard. Not when it comes to men." He nodded, understanding flickering across his face. "Tell me why?" Naomi sat back, her eyes distant. "I was engaged once. 3 years ago. He said all the right things, made all the right promises. Then one day, he told me I wasn't." Her voice caught slightly. "Wasn't what he wanted. That he needed someone more conventional." Richard's hand tightened around his mug. "He was a fool. Maybe. But it taught me something about trust, about how easily words can change." The morning light played across their table as a comfortable silence settled between them. A barista called out orders in the background, the routine sounds of the cafe creating a cocoon around their conversation. "Can I tell you something?" Richard asked, leaning forward, slightly. When Naomi nodded, he continued, "I've spent 20 years building an empire. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But most nights, I eat dinner alone in my office." Naomi watched him carefully, seeing past the polished exterior to something raw and honest. "I grew up poor," he continued. "Really poor. Kids at school used to laugh at my secondhand clothes. I promised myself I'd never be vulnerable like that again. So I built walls with wealth, used success as armor." He smiled sadly. "It worked too well. And now?" Naomi asked softly. "Now?" Richard's laugh was gentle. "Now I watch you with those kids at the center, see how real connection works, and I realize I've been doing it all wrong." Their coffee grew cold as they talked, the morning stretching out like honey. They shared stories of childhood dreams, Naomi's early desire to be a teacher, Richard's secret wish to write children's books. They laughed about their first jobs, their worst dates, their favorite movies. "I can't believe you've never seen The Princess Bride," Naomi exclaimed, grinning. "Is it that shocking?" "It's inconceivable," she declared, making him laugh at her terrible impression. As the cafe filled with the lunch crowd, they realized they'd been talking for hours. Richard insisted on paying, though Naomi protested. "Let me walk you home," he said as they stepped outside into the warm afternoon air. They walked slowly, neither wanting the morning to end. Their shoulders brushed occasionally, sending little sparks through both of them. When they reached Naomi's brownstone, they paused at the bottom of the steps. Richard turned to face her, uncertainty and hope warring in his expression. Slowly, carefully, he reached for her hand. His fingers were warm as they wrapped around hers, and Naomi felt her pulse quicken. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me a chance to show you who I really am." Naomi looked at their joined hands, feeling the gentle pressure of his thumb against her palm. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "I know. We'll take it slow." They stood there for a long moment, neither wanting to break the connection. Finally, Naomi squeezed his hand once before letting go. "Good night, Richard." "Good night, Naomi." She climbed the steps to her door, feeling his eyes on her back. Inside her apartment, she leaned against the closed door, her heart racing with equal parts hope and fear. That night, sleep eluded her. Naomi lay in bed, replaying their conversation, remembering the warmth of his hand, the sincerity in his eyes. Part of her wanted to trust this change in him, while another part whispered warnings about getting hurt again. Across town, in his penthouse apartment, Richard stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city stretched out before him, a glittering tapestry of lights and possibilities. His empire of glass and steel towered around him. But for the first time, it felt hollow. All he could think about was Naomi's smile, the way she listened without judgment, how she challenged him to be better. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, watching his breath fog the window. The view that had once filled him with pride now seemed empty compared to the warmth of one woman's hand in his, the sound of her laughter, the depth of her heart. In separate parts of the city, they both stayed awake, their thoughts intertwined, their hearts beating with the same mixture of hope and hesitation, as the night wrapped around them like a gentle embrace. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as teenagers filled the chairs arranged in a semicircle. Naomi stood at the front, adjusting the microphone stand while stealing glances at Richard, who sat quietly in the corner reviewing his notes. He wore a simple blue button-down shirt and khakis, a far cry from his usual power suits. "You okay?" she asked softly, approaching him. Richard looked up, his smile tight with anxiety. "I haven't been this nervous since my first board meeting. Just be honest with them. That's all they need." The room settled as Naomi stepped to the center. "Today, we have someone special joining our mentorship group. Many of you know Mr. Harrington from his visits here, but today he's going to share something different, his story." Richard stood, wiping his palms on his pants as he walked to the front. 25 young faces looked back at him, some curious, others skeptical. He cleared his throat. "Most people know me as the CEO of Harrington Enterprises. They see the fancy cars, the tall buildings, the success." He paused, looking at their faces. "But that's not where my story starts." The teenagers leaned forward as Richard's voice softened. "I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. My mom worked 3 jobs, and some nights, dinner was just crackers and peanut butter. My clothes came from donation bins, and kids at school never let me forget it." A girl in the front row nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding. "I was the skinny kid with holes in his shoes. The one who got pushed into lockers and called names." Richard's voice cracked slightly. "I told myself that if I could just get rich enough, no one would ever hurt me again. So I studied harder than anyone else. Worked longer hours. Missed birthdays, holidays, everything. Just chasing success." He pulled out his wallet and removed a worn photograph. "This was me at 15. He passed it around. A scrawny teenager with oversized glasses and ill-fitting clothes. "Man, that can't be you," one boy called out, making others laugh. Richard smiled. "Oh, it's me, and that kid thought money would solve everything." He was wrong. The room grew quiet as Richard continued. "I built my company from nothing. Made my first million by 25, my first billion by 35. But you know what? I was still that scared kid inside. Still pushing people away, still thinking I wasn't good enough." Naomi watched from the side, her heart aching as Richard revealed layers she'd never seen before. "The truth is," he said, looking at each teen in turn, "success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about becoming someone you're proud to be. And sometimes," he glanced at Naomi, "sometimes it takes someone special to help you see that." A girl raised her hand. "Did people try to use you for your money?" "All the time," Richard nodded. "I became so suspicious that I stopped letting anyone get close. I said cruel things, pushed good people away. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was just building a prettier prison." For the next hour, Richard answered questions honestly. About failure, about rejection, about learning to trust. He shared stories of business deals gone wrong, of betrayals, of nights spent questioning everything. When a boy asked about his biggest regret, Richard didn't hesitate. "Letting fear make me cruel. Words can hurt more than fists, and I've said things I'm deeply ashamed of." His eyes met Naomi's briefly. "But that's the thing about life. Every day is a chance to choose differently." As the session ended, several teens lingered to thank Richard. A girl with bright eyes touched his arm. "Thanks for being real with us, Mr. H. Most adults just tell us what we want to hear." Later, As the sun began to set, Richard and Naomi walked along the East River. The city lights were starting to twinkle, reflecting off the water like scattered stars. They stopped at a quiet spot near the Brooklyn Bridge, watching boats glide past. "You surprised me today," Naomi said softly. "Good surprise or bad surprise?" "Good. Very good." She turned to face him. "Those kids won't forget what you shared. Vulnerability like that. It changes things." Richard leaned against the railing, his expression thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you believe people can truly change?" His voice carried all the weight of his journey, all the hope and fear tangled together. Naomi stepped closer, her eyes meeting his. "Faith makes change possible," she said quietly. "I've seen it in those kids, in myself." She touched his hand gently. "In you." The city hummed around them, traffic and distant sirens, boat horns and the murmur of passing conversations. But in that moment, it all faded away as Richard slowly leaned in. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing softly against her skin. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer wrapped together. Naomi's hands found their way to his chest as she leaned into him, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, tender yet electric, carrying all the words they hadn't said yet. When they finally pulled apart, the city lights seemed brighter somehow. Richard rested his forehead against hers, breathing in the moment. "I never thought I'd find this," he whispered. Naomi smiled, her fingers intertwined with his. "Sometimes the best things come when we stop looking and start believing." They stood there by the river, wrapped in each other's presence, as the city continued its eternal dance around them. The water lapped gently against the shore, carrying whispers of possibility on its waves. The morning light streamed through Naomi's kitchen window as she sipped her coffee, still basking in the warmth of last night's kiss. Her phone buzzed, a text from one of her center volunteers with a link. "Have you seen this?" it read. Her stomach dropped as she clicked. The headline screamed across her screen. "Billionaire's PR stunt romance with fat black activist?" Photos from the block party fundraiser filled the page, Richard serving lemonade, dancing with kids, and their shared glances caught in unflattering angles. The article dripped with cruel speculation and thinly veiled racism. More messages flooded in. Different tabloids, same story. Richard Harrington's image makeover, from fat shaming to fake dating, CEOs calculated. Charity romance. Naomi's hands trembled as she scrolled through comments sections filled with vicious jokes and skepticism. One particular line cut deep. "Wonder how much he's paying her to forget what he really thinks about women like her." Her phone rang, Richard's name flashing on screen. She let it go to voicemail, needing time to process. But seconds later, another call came through from a journalist seeking comment. The center's phone lines lit up with media requests. By mid-morning, reporters gathered outside both the community center and her apartment building. Naomi felt trapped, her safe spaces invaded by hungry cameras and shouted questions. Around noon, Richard's car pulled up outside the center. He rushed in through the back entrance, finding Naomi in her office, surrounded by stacks of newspapers, all carrying variations of the same story. "Naomi, I swear I had nothing to do with this," he said, reaching for her hand. She pulled away, her voice quiet but sharp. "Did you know this would happen?" "What? No, of course not." "Really?" She picked up one tabloid after another. Richard Harrington's redemption arc. CEO shows growth through strategic romance. Your PR team must be thrilled. This isn't. Was any of it real? Naomi stood, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Or was I just your perfect opportunity? The fat black woman you once mocked, now conveniently helping you rebuild your image? Richard's face paled. How can you think that? After everything we've shared? Everything we've shared? Naomi laughed bitterly. It's been weeks, Richard. Weeks of you showing up, playing the changed man. And now look, you're the hero of this story. The billionaire who learned to love despite his prejudices. How inspiring. That's not fair, Richard protested. I've been genuine with you, with the kids. The kids. Naomi's voice cracked. Do you know what this does to them? They trusted you. Now they'll see these headlines, these horrible comments. They'll learn once again that people like us are just props in someone else's story. Richard stepped closer, desperation in his eyes. Let me fix this. I'll call my lawyers, my PR team. Your PR team? Naomi's expression hardened. So you can spin another story? Make this look better for your image? No, that's not what I meant. I think it's exactly what you meant. Naomi walked to the window, watching reporters mill about outside. You know what hurts the most? I started to believe in you. Started to think maybe people really could change. I've changed, Richard insisted. What I feel for you is real. Naomi turned back to him, tears finally falling. Leave. Naomi, please. Leave my center. Leave my life. Just go. Richard stood frozen, words failing him. Finally, he reached into his pocket and placed a small envelope on her desk. I wrote this last night, after our kiss. Please read it. But Naomi had already turned away, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Richard lingered a moment longer, then walked out, photographers' flashbulbs greeting him like lightning strikes. The afternoon dragged on endlessly. Naomi canceled classes at the center, sent her staff home early. She sat alone in her office, reading message after message from concerned friends and family. The envelope Richard left remained untouched. Evening found her in her apartment, curled on her couch in soft pajamas, a tub of ice cream melting beside her. Her phone kept buzzing with notifications, but she ignored them all. Old wounds she thought had healed split open again. Memories of another man who'd claimed to love her, only to admit later he was ashamed to be seen with her in public. Across town, in his penthouse, Richard stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, tumbler of whiskey in hand. The city sparkled below, but he felt nothing but emptiness. His own phone lay silent. He'd ordered his team to make no statements, give no responses. The whiskey burned his throat, as headlines from his past flashed through his mind. His casual cruelty at that restaurant, thinking nothing of dismissing entire groups of people. How many others had he hurt with thoughtless words? How many lives had he touched with his poison? He picked up his phone, thumbing through photos from the past weeks. Children's smiling faces at the center, Naomi's laugh caught in candid moments. The warmth in her eyes when she finally started to trust him. Sir? His assistant's voice came through the intercom. The board is requesting an emergency meeting tomorrow morning to discuss the PR situation. Richard pressed the button. Cancel it. But sir, cancel everything. And Mary? Take the rest of the week off. He walked to his home office, past the awards and accolades that suddenly seemed meaningless. Opening his laptop, he began typing. Not a press release, not a statement, but a letter to himself. Every cruel word he'd ever spoken, every person he'd stepped on climbing to the top, every moment of arrogance that led to this day. The whiskey glass sat untouched now as hours passed. When he finally looked up, the sky had darkened to deep purple. His phone showed missed calls from board members, PR consultants, even his mother. But the only number he wanted to call wouldn't answer. The only person who had seen past his wealth to his wounded core now saw only what everyone else did, a rich man's calculated performance. In her apartment, Naomi finally picked up Richard's envelope. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, but she couldn't bring herself to read the words inside. Instead, she held it to her chest and let the tears flow freely, mourning not just this loss but every time she'd been made to feel less than worthy of real love. The city continued its nighttime symphony outside their windows, traffic and distant sirens, late-night revelers and early morning workers. But in two different homes, two hearts ached with the same painful rhythm, separated by wealth and words, united only in their solitary grief. The headlines faded, but the pain lingered. Richard sat in his penthouse office, staring at untouched contracts and emails. 3 days had passed since the tabloid explosion, each hour stretching like molasses. His reflection in the window showed dark circles under his eyes and wrinkled clothes, a far cry from his usual polished appearance. Standing abruptly, he grabbed his keys. His driver waited downstairs, but Richard waved him off, choosing instead to walk the 15 blocks to the community center. The autumn air bit through his thin dress shirt. He'd forgotten his jacket again. At 7:30 in the morning, the center was just opening. Miss Jenny, the elderly janitor, worked methodically with her mop, humming gospel tunes. She startled when Richard approached. "Mr. Harrington? I didn't expect." "Please," he said softly, "just Richard. May I?" He gestured to the spare mop in the supply closet. Miss Jenny's eyes widened, but she nodded. Richard rolled up his sleeves, revealing expensive cufflinks that he quickly pocketed. The wooden handle felt foreign in his manicured hands, but he matched Miss Jenny's rhythm, working from the opposite end of the hallway. "You're doing it wrong, honey," she said after a few minutes, demonstrating the proper figure-8 motion. Richard adjusted his technique, grateful for the simple instruction. At 8:15, children began trickling in for morning programs. They called out cheerful greetings to Richard, seemingly unaware of any scandal. One little girl, Tamika, tugged his pant leg. "Mr. Richard, will you help me with math again?" "Not today, sweetheart," he replied gently, "but I'm sure your teacher will help." From her office window, Naomi watched Richard work. Her hands clenched around her coffee mug, emotions warring inside her. The sight of a billionaire CEO mopping floors alongside Miss Jenny seemed surreal. The morning stretched into afternoon. Richard moved from task to task, fixing wobbly shelves in the library, replacing burnt-out light bulbs, organizing the storage room. He worked silently, efficiently, avoiding Naomi's office entirely. During lunch service, he appeared in the cafeteria, donning a hairnet without complaint. He served macaroni and cheese alongside Mrs. Rodriguez, the cook, learning basic Spanish phrases as they worked. The children giggled at his pronunciation, but his smile never wavered. "You missed a spot." Trevor, a 12-year-old boy, pointed to a corner of the cafeteria after lunch. Richard grabbed the mop again. "Thank you for catching that." The next day followed the same pattern. Richard arrived early, worked quietly, and left late. He brought tools from home, fixing the perpetually jammed back door and the leaky drinking fountain. The staff watched him cautiously at first, but his genuine effort won them over. By the third day, the children had adjusted to his presence. They brought him their broken toys, their homework questions, their small troubles. Richard listened patiently, fixing what he could, teaching what he knew. "Where's Mr. Richard?" asked Marcus, a shy 7-year-old, when Richard missed Thursday morning to attend an unavoidable board meeting. The question echoed through the center, touching something in Naomi's heart she tried to ignore. Friday morning, Richard arrived with dirt smudged on his $1,000 shirt. He'd been planting flowers in the center's small garden, making the entrance more welcoming. Mrs. Rodriguez brought him water, clucking about the heat. "Why are you really here?" she asked directly. Richard wiped sweat from his brow, considering. "Because this place matters. These children matter. And sometimes the only way forward is to prove yourself with actions, not words." The cook nodded, satisfied with his answer. Later, she left a plate of homemade tamales on his workbench. A small gesture of acceptance. A week passed this way. Richard's expensive clothes grew more worn. His hands developed calluses, but his dedication never wavered. He worked through rain and shine, through whispers and stares, through Naomi's careful distance. The center began to show visible improvements. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new books filled the shelves, and the garden bloomed with late autumn flowers. But more than the physical changes, there was a shift in the atmosphere. The children walked taller, proud of their space, eager to maintain what Richard had fixed. Naomi watched it all from a careful distance. She saw him comfort crying kindergartners, high-five teenagers who improve their grades, and treat every person, from the youngest child to the oldest staff member, with genuine respect. One evening, as Richard packed up his tools, little Tamika approached Naomi. "Miss Brooks?" she asked, twisting her braids nervously. "Is Mr. Richard in trouble, because of those mean pictures?" Naomi knelt down to the child's level. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because you don't talk to him anymore. But he's not mean like those pictures said. He helped me learn fractions, and he fixed my jump rope, and he never makes fun of anybody." The simple wisdom of children could be devastating. Naomi hugged Tamika, her throat tight. "No, honey, he's not in trouble." Through the window, she watched Richard loading donated supplies into the storage room. His suit jacket was long forgotten, his shirt sleeves permanently rolled up, his designer shoes scuffed beyond repair. Yet he moved with purpose, with quiet dignity, asking nothing in return. More children began approaching Naomi, sharing stories about Richard's kindness. How he'd sat with Jeremy during lunch when the boy was being bullied. How he taught Maria to play chess. How he always remembered their names, their struggles, their small victories. The staff, too, had stories. Miss Jenny spoke of his respectful manner, how he never complained about the hardest tasks. Mrs. Rodriguez praised his willingness to learn, to admit mistakes, to try again. Each evening, Richard left without seeking acknowledgement. He would clean his workspace, ensure all tools were properly stored, and quietly slip out the back door. Sometimes, Naomi caught him pausing in the garden, touching the petals of the flowers he'd planted, a look of profound sadness crossing his face. 2 weeks after the scandal broke, Naomi found a journal on her desk. It was filled with detailed maintenance records, supply inventories, and notes about each child's progress. Richard's neat handwriting documented everything from Marcus's improving reading skills to the basement pipe that would need replacement soon. The last page held a simple note. These children deserve the best. Please use this information to continue their care, whether I'm here or not. That evening, Naomi stayed late, watching through her window as Richard mopped the cafeteria floor. His movements were practiced now, efficient. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, but he worked steadily, thoroughly, as if this manual labor was the most important task in the world. For a man who once measured worth in dollars and status, he now showed his value in floor cleaner and fixed door hinges, in patient tutoring and gentle encouragement, in actions that spoke louder than any tabloid headline. The children's question echoed in her mind. Where's Mr. Richard? They asked it not because they missed his wealth or power, but because they missed his presence, his kindness, his attention, his genuine care for their well-being. As Richard finished cleaning, his reflection caught in the window. For a moment, their eyes met in the glass. He didn't smile or wave or attempt to speak. He simply nodded, respect and resignation in his gaze, before returning the mop to its closet and heading toward the exit. The sound of his footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving Naomi alone with her thoughts and the evidence of his quiet redemption surrounding her. The autumn sun hung low in the afternoon sky, casting long shadows across the community center's playground. Children's laughter filled the air as they chased each other around the swings and climbed the jungle gym. Richard sat on the worn concrete steps, his tie loosened and jacket discarded, watching the scene before him with quiet contentment. Naomi emerged from the building, carrying 2 steaming paper cups. The scent of fresh coffee drifted between them as she settled beside him, leaving careful space between their bodies. She handed him one of the cups without meeting his eyes. "Thank you," Richard said softly, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. The familiar aroma reminded him of expensive boardroom meetings and power lunches, but somehow this simple coffee felt more valuable. They sat in companionable silence, watching as little Marcus conquered his fear of the monkey bars, while Tamika cheered him on from below. The moment felt precious, delicate, like a soap bubble that might burst at the slightest touch. Richard's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and switched it off without responding. The action caught Naomi's attention. "Important call?" she asked, her voice careful, neutral. Richard took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "The Morrison merger meeting. They wanted to reschedule for this afternoon." Naomi's eyebrows rose slightly. "The billion-dollar deal your company's been chasing for months?" $1,200,000,000. Richard corrected automatically, then smiled self-deprecatingly at his old habits. "But yes, that one." "And you turned it down?" Naomi's voice held a note of disbelief. She turned to study his profile, searching for signs of the calculating businessman she'd first met. Richard watched as Tamika now took her turn on the monkey bars, her face set in determined concentration. "I did." "Why?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Richard set his coffee cup down on the step beside him, taking time to gather his thoughts. The playground echoed with squeals and giggles as more children joined the monkey bar challenge, forming a line and calling out encouragement to each other. "Because none of that matters if I don't have the chance to do this right," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. Naomi's breath caught slightly at his words. She watched as he smiled and waved at Jeremy, who was showing off his new basketball moves. "This right?" she prompted, needing more clarity, more certainty. Richard gestured to the playground, to the children, to the building behind them. "All of this. These kids. This place." He paused, then added softly, "You." The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A cool breeze rustled through the newly planted garden, carrying the sweet scent of autumn flowers. "I used to measure everything in dollars and cents," Richard continued, his voice thoughtful. "Success meant bigger deals, taller buildings, more zeros in my bank account. But sitting here, watching Marcus finally make it across those monkey bars after trying for weeks?" He shook his head, smiling. "That feels like a bigger achievement than any merger." Naomi wrapped her hands tighter around her coffee cup, fighting the warmth spreading through her chest. "People don't change overnight, Richard." "No, they don't," he agreed readily. "But sometimes they wake up and realize they've been measuring life with the wrong ruler." A burst of laughter drew their attention to where Tamika had organized an impromptu dance contest. Children of all ages were spinning and jumping, their movements free and joyful. Remember when you told me commitment means showing up, not just writing checks? Richard asked, turning to face her fully. Naomi nodded, remembering the steel in her voice that day, the skepticism in her heart. You were right. These past weeks have taught me more about value than 30 years in business ever did. These kids don't care about my net worth or my stock portfolio. They care that I remember their names, that I listen to their stories, that I show up when I say I will. The sincerity in his eyes made Naomi's carefully constructed walls tremble. She saw no trace of the arrogant CEO who had dismissed her with cruel words that first night. Instead, she saw a man who had learned to kneel in the dirt to plant flowers with kindergartners, who celebrated small victories with genuine joy, who worked without complaint at tasks far beneath his pay grade. The merger would have meant millions in bonuses, she said, testing him. Richard laughed softly. And what would I do with more millions? Buy another penthouse I barely live in? Another car I rarely drive? He gestured to his rumpled shirt and scuffed shoes. I'm learning that some things can't be bought. Trust, respect, the way these kids' faces light up when they master something new. A small smile tugged at Naomi's lips as she watched him wave to Maria, who was showing off her latest chess strategy to her friends. Besides, Richard continued, his voice growing softer, all the money in the world wouldn't fix what I broke with my ignorance and pride. Some things are worth more than billion-dollar deals. The playground was bathed in golden light now, the children's shadows stretching long across the pavement. Parents would start arriving soon, but for now, the moment felt suspended in amber, precious, and perfect. Naomi felt something shift inside her, like ice cracking in spring. The wall she'd built around her heart developed a hairline fracture as she watched Richard wave to each child by name, his smile genuine, his attention focused entirely on their joy. Mr. Richard, Tamika called out, waving frantically. Come see our dance. Miss Brooks, you too. Richard glanced at Naomi, a question in his eyes. When she nodded slightly, he stood and offered his hand to help her up. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, allowing herself to feel the warmth of his palm against hers. They walked together toward the playground, where the children immediately surrounded them, eager to share their new dance moves. The setting sun painted everything in soft gold, and the air was filled with laughter and chatter. As they watched the impromptu performance, standing close enough for their shoulders to brush, Naomi felt the tentative return of something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope, warm and fragile as a newly kindled flame. The children danced and twirled, their faces bright with joy, while Richard and Naomi stood side by side, bearing witness to the simple miracle of childhood happiness. In that moment, surrounded by innocence and possibility, the harsh words of tabloid headlines seemed to fade away, replaced by the sound of genuine laughter and the warmth of renewed connection. The Manhattan Convention Center buzzed with activity as hundreds of educators, administrators, and business leaders filed into the main auditorium. Banners promoting Education Reform 2024 hung from the rafters, and volunteers in bright blue shirts directed attendees to their seats. Naomi Brooks hesitated at the entrance, her hand clutching the invitation she'd found in her office mailbox 3 days ago. She hadn't planned to come, but something, curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper, had drawn her here. She chose a seat in the back row, where shadows offered a measure of privacy. The stage gleamed under professional lighting, a podium centered perfectly with the Harrington Industries logo projected on the screen behind it. Program materials detailed the company's new educational technology initiative, promising to bridge the digital divide in underserved communities. As other attendees filled the rows ahead of her, Naomi noticed several familiar faces from local schools and nonprofits. They waved, but she managed only slight nods in return, her stomach too knotted for proper socializing. Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator's voice boomed through the speakers. Please welcome our keynote speaker, CEO of Harrington Industries, Richard Harrington. Polite applause rippled through the audience as Richard walked onto the stage. He looked immaculate in a charcoal suit, every inch the billionaire businessman. But Naomi noticed something different, a slight hesitation in his step, an uncertainty in his bearing that hadn't been there before. Richard adjusted the microphone, his fingers drumming briefly on the podium. The room fell silent, hundreds of faces turned expectantly toward him. He cleared his throat and began speaking. Thank you all for being here today. I'm supposed to tell you about Harrington Industries' new educational initiative, about how we're investing $50 million in technology for underserved schools, about our 5-year plan to revolutionize digital learning. He paused, looking down at his prepared notes. Then, in a gesture that made Naomi sit straighter, he pushed the papers aside. But first, I need to tell you a story about failure. My failure, not a business failure. God knows we hear enough about those in quarterly reports. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. No, this is about moral failure, about the kind of failure that money can't fix. The room grew still. In her back row seat, Naomi felt her heart begin to race. 3 months ago, I sat in an expensive restaurant and said something unforgivable. I said, and I quote, "I don't marry fat black women. They're not my type." His voice cracked slightly on the words. Gasps and murmurs spread through the audience. Phones appeared in hands, cameras clicking. Naomi pressed her palms against her knees, fighting the urge to flee. I said those words with the casual cruelty of someone who had never examined his own prejudices. Someone who thought wealth made him better than others. Someone who confused the size of his bank account with the size of his heart. Richard's eyes scanned the crowd, and for a moment, Naomi thought he might have spotted her. But he continued speaking, his voice growing stronger. Then she walked in. The woman I had just insulted without knowing her. She walked in, and everything I thought I knew about beauty, about worth, about love, it all fell apart. The silence in the room was absolute now. Even the usual rustling of papers and clicking of laptops had ceased. She runs a community center that changes lives every day. Not with million-dollar technology, but with dedication, compassion, and unwavering faith in human potential. She looks into the eyes of children society has written off and shows them their own worth. Tears pricked at Naomi's eyes as she remembered countless afternoons spent with her kids, the small victories and steady progress that made every struggle worthwhile. I watched her work. I saw her move mountains with nothing but determination and love. And I learned that my tower of wealth was built on shallow ground compared to the foundation of genuine service she created. Richard gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles white. You know what she said to me? She said, "Your money can build towers, but your heart lives in ruins." She was right. I had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. Camera flashes intensified. Social media would be exploding, Naomi knew, but she couldn't look away from the man on stage. This man who bore Richard's face but spoke with a humility she'd never expected to hear. So yes, Harrington Industries is launching an educational initiative. Yes, we're investing millions in technology. But that's not why I'm here today. I'm here because I need to publicly acknowledge my failure and my growth. I'm here because sometimes the most important lessons come from being absolutely wrong about everything you thought you knew. His voice softened, becoming more intimate, despite the large space. I once said I don't marry fat black women. Then she walked in, and she taught me what beauty really is, what courage looks like, what love means. She showed me that true worth isn't measured in dollars or market share, but in the lives you touch and the hearts you heal. Naomi pressed a hand to her mouth, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Around her, the audience sat spellbound. I learned that real change isn't about grand gestures or big checks. It's about showing up, day after day. It's about sitting with a child struggling with math homework. It's about serving meals and painting walls and learning names and stories. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, instead of looking through them. The silence stretched for several heartbeats after he finished speaking. Then, like a wave-building force, applause began to roll through the audience. People rose to their feet, their clapping thunderous in the large space. Cameras continued to flash as Richard stood at the podium, looking somehow both stronger and more vulnerable than Naomi had ever seen him. His eyes searched the crowd again, and this time they found her. Their gazes locked across the distance. In that moment, through her tears, Naomi saw the truth of his transformation written plainly on his face. This wasn't a PR move or a calculated strategy. This was a man who had truly changed, who had found the courage to face his flaws publicly and grow beyond them. The standing ovation continued, filling the convention center with its energy. But for Naomi and Richard, the world had narrowed to their shared look, to the understanding passing between them, to the realization that sometimes love grows most beautifully in the spaces where pride has been humbled and truth has been spoken aloud. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the convention center steps as Richard pushed through the glass doors, his heart pounding. He'd rehearsed this speech countless times, but nothing had prepared him for actually delivering it, for laying his soul bare in front of hundreds of people, cameras, and most importantly, her. Naomi stood at the bottom of the steps, her eyes glistening with tears. But these weren't the hurt-filled tears he'd seen weeks ago. Her smile, bright and genuine, told a different story. She took a step toward him, then another, until they stood face to face. "I heard every word," she said softly, wiping at her cheeks. "And I believe you, Richard. I really do." Richard reached out, tentatively touching her hand. When she didn't pull away, he intertwined their fingers, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "Walk with me?" They strolled through the bustling city streets, paying no attention to the occasional stares or the people who recognized them from the media coverage. The spring air was crisp and sweet, carrying the scent of blooming trees from nearby Madison Square Park. "You know," Naomi said, squeezing his hand, "when I first met you, I never thought I'd hear you admit to being wrong about anything." Her laugh was light, playful, let alone in front of hundreds of people. Richard chuckled, running his free hand through his hair. "Trust me, that wasn't exactly on my life plan either. But then again, neither was falling in love with the most incredible woman I've ever met." They walked for hours, weaving through the city streets, sharing stories and dreams. Richard told her about his childhood, about the shame of wearing secondhand clothes and being mocked for bringing government cheese sandwiches to school. Naomi spoke about her journey to self-love, about learning to embrace every curve and angle of herself despite a world that often told her she shouldn't. As evening approached, Naomi tugged on his hand. "Come home with me? I'll cook dinner." Her apartment was exactly as Richard had imagined it. Warm, inviting, with walls covered in photos of smiling children from the gay community center and artwork clearly made by little hands. The kitchen was small but well-loved, with herb plants growing in the window and recipe books showing signs of frequent use. "Here," Naomi said, tossing him an apron. "You can help chop the vegetables." They moved around each other in the tiny kitchen space, Richard following her instructions as she taught him how to properly dice onions and mince garlic. When he accidentally splashed sauce on his shirt, Naomi laughed so hard she had to lean against the counter. "You know," she said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "Most billionaires probably don't spend their evenings chopping vegetables in a modest apartment kitchen." Richard stepped closer, brushing a spot of flour from her cheek. "Most billionaires don't know what they're missing." As they sat down to eat, Naomi grew thoughtful. "Richard," she said, pushing her food around her plate, "I need you to understand something. Trust. It's not like flipping a switch, it's more like growing a garden. It takes time, patience, consistent care." Richard reached across the table, taking her hand. "Naomi, listen to me. I'm not going anywhere. I don't need this to happen fast. I just need it to happen right. Because when I think about my future now, all I see is you. All I want is forever with you." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes again, but her smile was radiant. She stood up, walking around the table, and Richard pushed his chair back to meet her. When she stepped into his arms, it felt like coming home. They stood there in her small kitchen, holding each other close as the city lights twinkled through the window and the evening settled softly around them. Their embrace spoke of second chances, of hearts healing, of love that grows stronger for having overcome obstacles. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of Naomi's home and wrapped in each other's arms, Richard understood that all his wealth, all his success, all his carefully constructed walls, none of it compared to the simple, profound joy of holding the woman he loved and being exactly where he was meant to be. The community center's kitchen buzzed with afternoon energy as children darted in and out, drawn by the rich aroma of vegetable soup simmering on the stove. Naomi stood at the counter, showing a group of girls how to knead dough for fresh rolls, while Richard stirred the enormous pot, his sleeves rolled up and a content smile on his face. "Mr. Richard, is it ready yet?" called out 8-year-old Jasmine, bouncing on her toes. "Almost," he chuckled, tasting the broth. "Miss Naomi's secret recipe needs just a little more time." The kitchen was warm and filled with laughter, pots clattering, and the happy chatter of children helping to set tables. Richard watched Naomi as she guided small hands in shaping the dough, her patience and love touching everything she did. His hand slipped into his pocket, feeling the small velvet box he'd been carrying for days, waiting for the perfect moment. Something in his heart whispered, "This is it." "Naomi," he said softly, turning down the heat under the soup. "Could you come here for a second?" She brushed flour from her hands and walked over, raising an eyebrow. "Everything okay with the soup?" Instead of answering, Richard reached for her hand. The children fell quiet, watching with wide eyes as he lowered himself to one knee. Naomi's free hand flew to her mouth, tears already gathering in her eyes. "You are my heart," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion as he pulled out the velvet box and opened it to reveal a stunning diamond ring. My forever. Gasps and squeals erupted from the children. Some jumped up and down, while others pressed closer, eyes shining with excitement. Yes, Naomi whispered, tears streaming down her face. Yes, yes, yes. The room exploded with cheers, as Richard slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to embrace her. The children swarmed around them, hugging their legs and jumping with joy. Someone started singing, and soon the whole kitchen was filled with celebration. Naomi rested her head against Richard's chest, his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear. Around them, their community, their family, continued to celebrate, the love in the room as warm and nourishing as the soup still simmering on the stove. In this moment, they were living proof that love, when rooted in faith and compassion, could heal even the deepest prejudice, leaving behind a legacy of hope that would touch generations to come. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe and tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.